mentioned like being technical, and jazz is indeed technical, but in a very different way. And so my pick this month was "Kind of Blue" by Miles Davis. When you say jazz, people think Miles Davis. When you say Miles Davis, people think of "Kind of Blue." Not to say that like he wasn't prolific in like later years of his life, or that jazz is in any way like as monolithic as that reference might make it sound, but like "Kind of Blue" is one of those albums that just like is classic in its own right. So I was really excited to sort of bring this album up and make everybody listen to it, because I think it's easily one of my favorite records that I own. And what's interesting is that a little anecdote here. At my job, I started a community of like the music of Mathematica. I work for a company called Mathematica, and on Microsoft Yammer, which I don't know if you ever use Microsoft Yammer, but it's not the best like platform. Anyway, beside the point.
Wow, shots at Microsoft Yammer.
What's that?
Microsoft Yammer is catching strays from us tonight.
So I posted something about "Kind of Blue" on there, and like the CEO saw it, and he like made some like monologue comment about how if you ever ask anybody like what's their favorite album and they're a jazz fan, 9 out of 10 people would say "Kind of Blue." Whereas like if you ask anybody else who's preferred other genres, you'll get any kind of answer that you want. I thought that's kind of interesting, like what makes this record so prolific, in the sense of like what makes it so like recognizable. And listening to it again for this recording session, it reminds me about everything I love about jazz. It reminds me about the kind of coordination you have to have as musicians, the kind of ear you have to have when you're playing in a jazz band, where you're riffing on each other, you're building each other up, you're like trying to make each other sound better, and no like 2 or 3 measures are going to be the same. On this record, I know you've got some amazing folks. You've got Miles Davis, obviously, Julian Adderley on the alto saxophone, John Coltrane on the tenor saxophone, Wynton Kelly piano, Bill Evans piano, Paul Chambers and James Cobb on bass and drums respectively. For the time, like that was an all-star cast of musicians, and John Coltrane obviously went having a very big successful solo career as well. But the story goes that Miles Davis just kind of they were going to record this, and like the morning of or like the day before, Miles Davis had like scratched out some ideas on like a piece of paper, came in, showed up, said like, hey, this is what we're recording. Like these are like sort of the modes of the songs. And the modes in jazz songs are very like, it's one drum line that kind of repeats every, like every 4th measure or something like that. It's very sort of just a structure, right? And then you fill in the music from there. But apparently, like most of the songs, if not all the songs in this album, were like recorded on one of the first takes that they took. Like they just sat down and played this. So what makes this record incredible is not only the fact that you have like incredible musicians, but you also have like it's coming off the top of the dome, and they got it right from the get-go. And yeah, listen to this album front to back is like one of those, they capture so like different moods so well, while also having incredible technical skill, while also having like just an ear for the music. I can't get enough of this album. I love it to bits. What do you guys think?
Oh, it's been one of my favorites for a while. It was one of when I was initially getting into jazz, I remember I had to sort of go from rock to fusion to straight jazz, because I needed to sort of acclimate myself, so to say. And we're talking high school, when I really wasn't listening to a crazy amount of variety. And Miles Davis being as because it is incredible. It's very technical stuff, but it's also very approachable stuff. It's jazz can get pretty avant-garde sometimes. And while I like that stuff now, when I think of like jazz, like if I'm like, hey, what would sound like jazz to the average person? This album is sort of what stands out to me because it's just such an exemplary example of just like what's good, solid jazz sounds like. And it just it hangs in such a way that's trying to think of a good way to put it, but it just the whole album just sort of has like a it almost kind of feels like it's covered in a mist, like a fog almost, without any sort of better way of articulating that. It just sort of hangs around in this fog, and you just kind of want to stick around there and just hang out.
That's
You know what I mean? I don't
beautiful
know. Like I don't know if I'm really getting anywhere with that, but it just I guess the atmosphere of the album, they had an idea of what
It's
they wanted
moody.
to sound.
It's a moody album. It's very like it can be very like somber, and like it kind of reminds me of like a lot. I feel like a lot of it is, at least, but like it feels very like it reminds me of like a noir kind of style.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it's not like a big band pop like kind of jazz, or like it's
No, very, very,
different.
very the
It's
big
very
sleep,
different.
And
Mhm.
it's that
chill.
noir bit, Matt, is actually really resonates with me. Like there's a couple of horn hooks in there, like horn notes, where like I think it's on not Freddie Freeloader, maybe All Blues on side 2, where it's like or something along those lines. And
Yeah, I remember.
There's
Yeah,
like dark streets, rain, like fedora and trench coat.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at. You sort of touched on it perfectly. Very, very noir, very trench coat in the alley, very Sherlock Holmes pipe hanging out of the mouth, and just as cool as can be. Yep, love it.
Yeah, I've listened to this album a few times. Just obviously this album is like a genre-defining album. It's a classic. It's like, but literally, yeah, like it's if you name a jazz album, it's kind of Blue. That's what you think. And so I've listened to this a few times, and I've never really like. There's something about it where I kind of lose focus. I kind of like start thinking about other things when I'm listening to it. So I was listening to it again. I was just like, I wonder like why that kind of happens. I don't know, because it was just like a kind of an interesting thing that I felt my brain doing. I would just like start thinking about other things. So I looked up kind of like why this album is so genre defining, like why it's so inspirational, why it is the jazz album. And James kind of mentioned this, but basically what it does is like on a lot of these songs, he's literally changing mode within the song. So like a mode is like the notes that you're kind of allowed to play when you're like improvising or playing playing your solo or whatever. So like to be able to do that mid song just completely shifts the mood within the song, completely shifts the tone, completely shifts what it's saying. Which is crazy. You don't hear that in songs because it's like jarring. It's like
It's totally nuts. Like usually you have like even with bands that really know what they're doing, they usually say like, oh, let's like play within this mode. Give our stuff like sort of an exotic sound or kind of a somber sound. But to just sort of be able to go from mode to mode and to be able to have the mental map of where you're going in order to articulate the right notes, it's pretty nuts, honestly.
But it doesn't sound. It's not like a super hard album to listen to, or like a jarring album. Like some of his like what's that other album he does later on? Like Bitches Brew. You ever listen to that one?
Yeah, that's a great one.
That one's definitely a different. That's more wild. I feel like
that one's got Chick Corea on it.
I don't know what that is. What is that?
I was sure you know who Chick Corea is.
Who's that?
Chick Corea. He's like my favorite jazz artist.
He's not. But really quick, sorry, I want to finish my thought really quick here before I move on. Yeah. So basically, just being able to do that within a song is cool and it's awesome. And it's rule breaking. It breaks the rules. Like I guess people weren't doing that back then. But that's like literally what jazz is. It's like improvising and like breaking the rules and doing stuff like that. So super cool album. Now that I've read that Wikipedia article and I'm like, damn, gotta listen to it way more. And you can really, when you kind of hear when it's supposed to come, it really does. You can hear just how that tone shifts and how that mode shifts. So cool stuff. Yeah, cool. Sorry. All right, man, take her away.
I want to say a couple more things. But I didn't know all those players played on this album. That's pretty wild. I know that didn't Herbie Hancock play with Miles Davis when he was really young? Is that right?
Totally. Yeah. Herbie Hancock and Davis were pretty close at one point, I think.
Yeah, I think that he played with him for a while.
Yeah.
But I don't know, that's cool. I didn't know all those players played on it. But I do know that this album, when it first released, it didn't sell that well. And so it's kind of, and then like over time, people just started appreciating it for what it is. I did read that somewhere, which I think is kind of interesting.
It's like Van Gogh sort of not being appreciated in his time, right? Except that Miles Davis like went on to produce way more music and was like critically acclaimed in his time. But like arguably his most notable work wasn't recognized as such at the moment.
I mean, I think people weren't.
Just goes to show you sort of like what is, what becomes genre defining when people. It's almost like a retroactive thing, right? Like everybody listens to, the people will listen to everything, and then 20 years later be like, oh right, that album, yeah. I think that's an interesting phenomenon.
No, I literally think that people weren't like ready for it because it was like, it's just so different from what you would hear in any other song or any other, it just wasn't. And then, and then like James, you were saying, people go back and are like, oh, wait a second, this isn't just random notes.
Well, but that's really interesting too, right? Is that like, not only was nobody ready for it, but it was also, as Lauren was saying, like, it's also approachable, right? You can come back to it and say, oh, and I'm like, oh, and be hit with something totally different. And like, it's that balance that I think is really kind of cool about the album, is that you have all this really interesting experimental stuff going on. At the same time, you also have these modes and these sort of, what do you even call them? They're not chords, but like sort of these noises and instrumentation that's incredibly poignant. Makes you feel stuff. So I don't know. Is there anyone else? Anything they want to say before I rate this album? This album for me is like a 9.5. This is. There's a couple of moments in there where I wish like more stuff was happening, but at the same time, like that's really not the point of the album, and I have to fight my own urge to want that. But this is as close to a perfect album as I think I can get. When I